Hello, book lovers! Welcome to the 123rd episode of Authors Love Bookstores, presented by A Mighty Blaze. I'm Kimberly Hensle Lowrance. I host and produce this show with my partner and friend, Joe Moldover. So on our show, Authors Love Bookstores, we bring to you a conversation that shines a light on storytelling, creativity, and of course, independent bookstores. And today we are extremely lucky to hop across the pond, travel across the pond to Scotland to welcome author Claire Alexander. Welcome, Claire.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here.
I'm very excited to have you on the show today and to talk about your wonderful book. Let me tell all of you out in the audience land a little bit about Claire. So Claire, as I mentioned, is joining us today from Scotland, specifically the west coast of Scotland, where she lives with her children and her two dogs. Claire is a freelance writer. She's written for the Washington Post, the Independent, the Huffington Post, Glamour, and many other outlets. In 2019, one of her essays was published in the award-winning literary anthology, We Got This, Solo Mom Stories of Grit, Heart, and Humor. And most excitingly, her debut novel, Meredith Alone, came out in the United States in November. And it's wonderful, and I'm so excited we're going to talk about it today. So welcome, welcome. So Claire, when I read this book, I thought, this is such a satisfying read. I felt that I fell in love with Meredith, the main character, right away. I love the structure of the book. I thought the pacing was terrific. I thought that there is a lot of kindness in this book, which is maybe I crave that right now, or maybe we all crave it. And I got to the end and I thought, oh, I'm so glad that I read this book. And I'm also so interested in these characters and what their lives might have been like afterward, which is like the best compliment, right? When a reader says, oh, I want to know where they are now and what they're doing. And I'm not the only one who really likes this book because the reviews were terrific. So Publishers Weekly calls the book a sensitive portrayal of what it means to live with mental health issues. And the result is a quiet slice of life story with heart to spare. Kirkus calls Meredith Alone an optimistic, feel-good novel that might just soothe some post-COVID angst. It was an Indie Next pick here in the US in November. And for our audience, an Indie Next pick is basically a book where independent booksellers say, hey, pay attention to this. This is something we want you to keep your eye on. And then there are more and more reviews. Zibby Owen, who's a big book influencer here in the United States, wrote on Good Morning America that this is a charming and thought-provoking novel. And there's so many more. We're going to put a bunch of them in the comments below. Congratulations. That must be such makes your mind explode to have so much wonderful feedback about your book. How has it been responding to all of this?
Yeah, it's been amazing. I mean, I don't know. I had no expectations. I've had no expectations at any part of this process, and I don't think any authors really do. Because when you're kind of in the writing stage or the editing stage, you're just so in it that you can't even think ahead. You know, I'm always just thinking, am I actually going to finish this? Is it going to be any good? So yeah, it's been very surreal, but it's been amazing. Just like every time I get a message on Instagram from a reader to say just how much they connected with Meredith, how much they really believed her story. And that was really important to me, that her story was authentic, because let's face it, she's in this situation that is not normal. You know, I know we've all gone through lockdowns, and a lot of us have experienced isolation that we've never experienced before. But she's not left her house for more than 3 years, so it's pretty extreme. So it was really important to me that readers believed in her situation and just really felt that connection with her. And it's just wonderful. I love it. That's just been the best part of the whole thing. Just when someone just takes a few minutes of their day to reach out and let me know how much they love the book. It's wonderful.
I'm so glad that you're getting that positive feedback from readers directly. That must I can't imagine how thrilling that must be. It's really wonderful.
Yeah, it's amazing. And actually, it's funny you say about the characters and, you know, what are they doing now? And a lot of people have asked, you know, what's she up to now, or what's so and so doing? And my dad's the worst for that. I mean, my dad read my very first draft, so like the terrible draft, like just when I think about it now, oh my God! But he read it and he loved it. I don't suppose he's got a choice, really. He has to say that. But he's read all the iterations,
Right.
and he still will say to me now, are you going to go back to Meredith? Are you going to do a sequel? Like, I want to know where she is, what's happened to her. Yeah, so, and my dad's actually, he's sort of, I've not given him the answer, so he's kind of created this whole, you know, future life for Meredith, which yeah, it's cool. It's great when people are so invested in a character that they think beyond the end of the book, like further than I've even thought about her.
Well, I think that means that the character is truly authentic, right? That they recognize the character as someone, as themselves, or maybe someone they know. And I just think that's when you know you did a good job, right? When everyone's rooting for and imagining the next phase.
You know, we've all gone through hard times, and I think what we've experienced in the last few years in particular, I think a lot of people who before COVID had no mental health issues, just, you know, never felt loneliness, never felt isolated, they have felt like that, and I know I have in my life, like, you know, way before the pandemic. I've gone through my own mental health issues since I was a teenager, really. So yeah, I think it was really important to me that it was an authentic portrayal of those struggles, and I think we can relate to Meredith, even though we're not in that situation that she's in, even though we all leave our houses and, you know, live a more normal life. It's really about the fundamental things that we're all looking for, you know, happiness and connection and friendship and all the different forms that can take.
So can you talk a little bit about what is this book? What's happening in Meredith Alone? Why hasn't Meredith left her house? And so to our audience, the book opens up and Meredith has been in her house for, it's like 1,214 days or something like that.
Yes.
And that's actually like a really clever structural element that you have, is that we have a countdown throughout the book on how many days she's been in the house.
Yeah.
And we should add that this book takes place before COVID. So it's before the COVID pandemic, when staying home is something we all became accustomed to. So tell us a little bit about, who is Meredith? What's going on? What, like, if you were to, what's your elevator pitch? If you were meeting somebody on the street and they said, oh, what's your book about? What would you say Meredith Alone is about?
So when we first meet Meredith, you're absolutely right. Well done. You've got it right. Sometimes I still have to think, how many days is it? Is it, you know, 1219? 1,214 days. She hasn't left. She hasn't left her house for that time. Like, she hasn't opened the front door and stepped onto her doorstep. So that's the point she's at. And then over the course of the novel, it goes back in time to her childhood and also the more recent past, and also the narrative moves on in the present, and we learn what happened to Meredith. I mean, she didn't have a brilliant childhood. She's had a pretty tough time, but something happens to her that really is like, it's just the absolute turning point, and this traumatic event is what then causes her to self-isolate. It's not a choice, really. It's really not a choice that she makes. She's not able to leave her house because of the trauma she's experienced. And I don't want to spoil it by saying what that is, but it all becomes clear over the novel, and she has to try to come to terms with those difficult family relationships and, you know, repair the ones that are able to be repaired, and just kind of work out where she goes from there. And it's just really her journey to recovery. And really, I mean, she's a normal woman, you know, she's kind of like me. She's, you know, she's 39 when we first meet her, so she's a bit younger than me, but she's, you know, a woman of that age. She lives alone in a flat in Glasgow. She's got her beloved cat, she's got friends, she's got a full-time job, she works from home, which is handy when she's self-isolating because she can still work. But she's just an independent woman, like so many women, not just in Glasgow, but around the world. But she ends up in this very, very abnormal situation.
So one of the things I mentioned at the beginning, I thought the book had a lot of kindness, and I want to talk a little bit about that. It can be very difficult to read a book about someone who is experiencing mental health challenges, who has trauma in their background. I mean, I know for me, especially after the past couple of years of COVID and everything that's been associated with that, I just want to read happy things, right? Like, and I feel like that, I wondered if that was a deliberate choice on your part to write this book with such compassion, because we are not, as a reader, re-traumatized. You know how sometimes you read a book and the character goes through bad things, and so we also have to go through that bad thing with them. This book is very thoughtful about letting us know what happened, but also protecting us as the reader. Do you feel is my assessment sort of accurate? Is that, I'm curious, because I really felt like I understood the pain that she'd experienced and that I could advocate for her, almost like her friend, but I didn't have to be re-traumatized. And I wondered if that choice was deliberate on your part to infuse so much compassion and kindness in the book, or did it just happen because that's who you are? Or I'm just curious about that.
I mean, I think from my own experiences, I have definitely learned that kindness and compassion is just at the heart of any recovery process, whether it's my own or, you know, someone I love. But I have to say, the book, actually, the first few drafts were a lot darker.
Oh, interesting.
And it was my agent, my wonderful agent, Juliet Mushins, who pulled me up on that and said, we're going to have to tone it down a little bit, because this woman has gone through so much, basically from being a very young child, and you just keep throwing things at her. And I think it's just going to be too much for some readers. And at that point, I was just kind of so invested in the story and the way I'd kind of created it. I wasn't completely on board, but now looking back, it was such good advice, because even the book as it is now, I know it will be triggering for some people, because a lot of people will have gone through very, very similar experiences to Meredith. So I didn't want it to be too dark. And that was one thing we really focused on during the editing process, just to really make sure there's enough light in there. But on that point, that in itself is really important to me for another reason, because people who have mental illness, depression, anxiety, you know, whatever it is, whatever they've been through, that's one part of them. And my mental health is just one part of me, and it's an important part. And it's a part that I really pay attention to, but there's so much more to me. And so that's why I wanted to show Meredith as just a really multi-layered woman who has gone through the most horrendous thing, and really, like my agent said, you know, she's had so much thrown at her. And if you look at it all on paper, you're like, oh my God, like, how is she even, you know, getting out of her bed? But she's still funny, and she's interested in people, and she's bright, and she's got hobbies, and that is actually part of her recovery that she maybe doesn't even realize. But yeah, it was important to me that it just wasn't I didn't want to write that kind of book. And I've read books myself that have had depressed women in them, and they've just left me feeling depressed myself. And I don't want that. You know, I love to feel when I read, like I love to cry, and I love to just really feel those emotions. But ultimately, I want to close a book and feel uplifted, unless it's, you know, like a crime thriller. That's totally different. But generally, I want to feel better. just a little bit better, either about myself or about the world, or, you know, and that's what I wanted readers to feel when they finished Meredith Alone. So
I think that you do that very well. I think that Meredith comes across as being brave, and I think the timing of it is part of it. You know, that we meet her on day 114, right? And you see her sort of at the point in her life where maybe she's thinking about a change.
yeah.
And you know, I was struck when I finished the book that in so many ways, this felt like a roadmap for all of us to emerge from COVID. You know, in so many ways, Meredith gives us an example of this is how you step back out into the world, right? This is how you re-engage, and you can do it. It takes some effort. And most of all, you need to be kind to yourself. So I really felt like that was something you did really well.
Yeah.
The other thing I loved about this book was the structure. And so maybe this is like the nerd, like the book nerd in me, but I love when we jump around in time and yet I am completely rooted in where I am. So I always knew where I was, which I have read books where that is not always happening. So we have a present day storyline when we go forward. This is 385 days she's been in. And then we have this other storyline where we jump around in time. Again, always knowing where we are. And I thought that was, again, done really well. And I wondered if that was something that came in the first draft, or did it come through lots of editing? Oh, you're shaking your head. So lots of editing got you to that point. Okay, can you talk a little bit about that? Because we have a lot of writers who watch the show, and I'm just any advice on like having lots of timelines and something that you like you look back now and you think, oh gosh, I wish I had done that at the beginning, or was it you just had to learn it?
I feel like when it comes to planning and organization, I'm the worst person to give advice because I just don't do that. So, but I've definitely learned a few things, but oh my God, it's such a nightmare. And I remember for the present day timeline, obviously there's the date. No, there's the day. So the day and like 1,400, day 1,402 or whatever. And then the date. And obviously that has to be correct. So I printed out like 2018 and 2019 calendars from the internet, and I'm there sort of like just making such a big mess with pens and stuff and working out where day one is and where everything else comes along. And you know that way where you're maybe like doing sums in the calculator and you do it 5 times and you get a different answer each time. So that's where I was. It was such a headache. And my brain just doesn't really work like that. So where someone else would maybe actually quite enjoy that kind of thing. Oh my God, it was torture. Yeah, I mean, definitely, I can't even remember the structure in the first draft. But we did spend a lot of time on that. Because we didn't want, because it jumps back to her childhood, and then there's also flashbacks to maybe just a few years ago when she's an adult. I didn't want readers to feel confused, like where are we now and what's going on. So I'm so glad you didn't feel like that. But yeah, that was difficult, and that's one of the things that when I was writing the book, I just didn't even think about that. I didn't think what a headache it might turn out to be. But this attention to detail is so important. You have to get it right. So, but I also love books that have different timelines. I'm just always drawn to those stories. I find them fascinating. So, and my second book that I'm kind of in the early stages of now, it's also got a split timeline. So yeah, there's a bit of a pattern emerging.
Wonderful. Well, we're definitely going to ask you about your second book. I have that question. I wanted to know a little bit about the idea of resilience, because this book, we've talked a little bit about how Meredith is alone. She's at home. Obviously, Meredith Alone is the title. And she's staying at home, just her and her cat. But she is not completely isolated from the world. She has a close, wonderful friend in Sadie. We all should have a Sadie in our life. This is a friend from her childhood. She has a new friend named Celeste that she connects with online via a support group, and eventually their friendship moves to in person. And then there's Tom, who is a volunteer that I guess we would say here in the US that he sort of goes to meet with shut-ins and offer support and encouragement to make sure they don't feel isolated. And what's really interesting to me is that the book, she makes new friendships. Like, she makes this friendship with Tom. She makes this friendship with Celeste. And those connections offer her, and of course Sadie, kind of give her strength.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the role of friendships in the book and how that fuels our strength, Meredith's strength, and her resilience.
Yeah, I mean, she, I think with Tom, she meets Tom very early in the book. And we have lots of these befriending charities here in the UK. And I think most of the time it's elderly people who don't have a lot of family, and they really are isolated, and they might have mobility issues, and they rely on people, on volunteers, you know, on kind people coming into their homes. So I don't think maybe a woman of Meredith's age, who works full time, would be your kind of typical befriendee, but she's quite smart. She's very smart, Meredith. She kind of does the minimum that she has to do to keep people just so that people leave her alone, because she doesn't want social services to get involved. She doesn't want them knocking on her door. So she goes along with this befriending thing. She's not really up for it, but Sadie's idea, and she's like, okay, whatever, I'll do it. And she's not expecting Tom to have such an impact on her life. And I think the same with Celeste as well. And they just end up being so important, and so kind of instrumental in her recovery and her journey. But at the same time, she gives back to them just as much.
Yeah.
And I think that's where she really shows her strength. She's in this situation where she's wondering if she'll ever leave her house and what the rest of her life holds, but she still manages to give so much to other people. So I think that really is a sign of her strength, but she also has to let herself show her weakness as well. And I think that's something so many of us struggle with.
Right.
We don't want to come across as vulnerable, but really it takes such strength to do that, and it can just be a turning point. So that's all kind of part of her journey. And it's funny, actually, there's so many things happened while I was writing the book. Obviously, I was writing about a woman who was self-isolating, and then 5 months later, oh my God, we've gone into first lockdown in Scotland. And that's still just crazy to me that it was really helpful, actually, because I would think to myself, if I was struggling a bit with the situation or not being able to leave the house, I would think, what would Meredith do? And she kind of helped me get through it in different ways. But also during that time, I did a couple of online writing courses, and I made some great friends there. And one of them in particular, we have now met in real life, but for many, many, many months, it was just an online friendship. And it got to the point where, I mean, as it is now, it was like daily voice notes and messages, and just sharing our whole lives, not just sharing our writing experiences. And that was my first experience of an online friendship, of any kind of real online connection. And she's called Claire as well. And before I'd even met her in real life, I just knew that she was one of my closest friends, and that she would always be in my life. And that was quite a surprise to me, because I wasn't skeptical about online friendships or relationships, but I'd just never been in that position. And then I found myself in this position. So yeah, it's quite bizarre.
Can we talk a little bit about your road to publishing this novel? Because I think that's another example of strength. So I understand that you had been working on novels for very, very long, many years. Many years. And then this book you wrote in 9 months.
I think probably from writing the very first scene to getting to signing with my agent, it was 12 months. So
That's
Yeah, I mean, in one way, it took me forever to
right.
do this, but in another way, it did all happen really quickly. Once it was actually finished, it just went crazy. But yeah, I mean, I've just written forever. I was the little girl in the corner with the notebook and pen, and just scribbling away, writing stories. It was what I did. And I did that my whole life. And I've got lots of unfinished manuscripts that are terrible. They'll never see the light of day, but it's a process, and we all take our own time to get there. But yeah, I mean, I remember different points of my life saying to myself, right, I'm going to finish a book before I'm 30. And then I got pregnant at 29, and then the next decade it was just all about kids. And then I was like, right, okay, I'm definitely going to do this. I'm going to finish this book before I'm 40. And it wasn't even for me at that point, I'm going to finish it and send it to an agent, or I'm going to get a book deal before I'm 40. It really was just, I'm going to finish writing it. I'm going to have a complete manuscript. That was my dream, because I hadn't managed to do that. And I was really annoyed with myself that I hadn't managed it. But I don't know. I mean, I think life just got in the way, and it just sometimes doesn't happen. But I also think that this was the right book for me to write at the right time. I don't think I could have written this book when I was 25 or even 35, maybe. I think I had to go through certain things to get there. And even though Meredith, I'd basically planned out the whole novel before I'd even heard of COVID-19, it was a good time for me to write it, in the sense that it was a quiet year because we were under lockdown for a lot of it. And I mean, I still had the kids. I was breastfeeding my youngest at the time, and the two older ones were homeschooled for a bit. So it was stressful in a lot of ways, but writing this book was really therapeutic for me. It just gave me that creative outlet. And because we didn't have the usual kind of social pressures, because we were at home so much, I felt like I did have that headspace to focus on it. So during the pandemic, when we were kind of, under all these restrictions a lot of the time, that was when I did my redrafting and my submitting. And I don't know if I would have had that energy or time if we hadn't been under those circumstances.
Well, and I think it's important for our audience members who are not writers, not trying to get a book published, that's an extraordinarily fast process from writing a book to signing with an agent. But I think as you mentioned, when you put it in context, all those other manuscripts were preparation for this.
Yeah, I mean, basically, it was 25 years. It was 25 years. And then it was, just a matter of months. So life's just funny, isn't it? The way things, I just take it one day at a time. Like, I've stopped trying to figure out what's going to happen, what's going on. But
and you're not the only author. Like, I heard Min Jin Lee speak once, and she said it took her 23 years to write Pachinko. So I think that, we are different writers today than we were yesterday, a year ago, 10 years ago. And therefore we write a different story than we could have yesterday. I'm not the one who said that, actually. I think it was Margaret Atwood. I'm just paraphrasing. But the idea that, like, yeah, you probably couldn't have written this book at 35 because that wasn't who you were. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
We tell the story we were able to tell. So at the time we were able to tell. Well, I'm glad that the stars aligned.
Me too, yeah.
Me too. This is a great read, and I love that you found an agent who just believed in your book and so passionately. So that's really wonderful. So one question we want to ask you is about independent bookstores. So that's one of the hooks of this show, is we talk about wonderful independent bookstores. And so we'd love to hear about some indie bookstores in Scotland that you admire. And then our producer behind the scenes, Joe, will put links below. And to our audience, we're also putting links below to purchasing Claire's book. You can purchase it from bookshop.org here in the US, or your local indie bookstore. And we'll put those links below. And then we'll also put links to the bookstores you mentioned to buying your book directly from them because, oh, I know why. Because this is the US cover, but there's a different cover
Yeah,
in
I've
the
got it.
UK. Claire's going to show us. Is the book different? So like, was there editing you had to do to Americanize the book, or is it pretty much the same? Oh, it is.
Yeah, so I didn't do that. My publisher, that happened during the US publication process, and it was really just things like certain phrases that I guess people in other countries just wouldn't be familiar with, and there were some things were changed, some things were, but we've got different words for different things. So I can't even think of one. Like the one that always comes to mind is a nappy and a diaper.
Right.
And that's not even in my book, I don't think, but it's that kind of thing. And my kids, my two older kids, they just watch US YouTubers and US TV shows all the time. So they actually call it a diaper. And I'm like, it's a nappy. What are you talking about? But I think maybe one in the book was motorway, and I think you guys call it the freeway.
Well, actually, that's a great point because it depends on where you live in the United States. In California, you might call it a freeway. On the East Coast of the US, where I live, we call it a highway. So
I think it would be probably highway then. Yeah. So yeah, little things like that. But there was, I was prepared for that. I think that's quite common. Yeah.
That's fascinating, right? That you write a book and that takes place in Scotland, but you need to make some little tweaks for audience in other countries. Okay. So tell us about some indie bookstores in Scotland that you admire and why you admire them.
Oh, do you know, I've been thinking about this all day, and I remembered about the one that we used. So I live in quite a small seaside town in a county called Ayrshire, and the town is Troon, and it's like really small seaside town, and we do have lots of lovely independent shops. We don't have a bookstore anymore, an independent bookstore, but we had one when I was like a child and a teenager. And I can't even remember the name of it. And I actually asked some people on Facebook today, can anyone remember the name? And I got 3 different names. So I'm not going to say because we don't know what it's called, but it was brilliant. And I just remember going in with my mum, and it was tiny and it was just packed, like floor to ceiling with books. And I just loved it so much. And I was really sad when it shut down. And I think, it's hard for those independents to survive. So yes, I'm all up for supporting them. But now I have to travel to Glasgow to get the nearest independence, but that's not far from me. So that's absolutely fine. It's a pleasure. So the one that I love in Glasgow is called the Hindland Bookshop. And it's a small shop. It's owned by 2 former librarians, and I think they've been there for about 25 years. And it's just so lovely to go into. And I always I feel like when I go into an independent bookshop, I just find a treasure. Like I find something that I've maybe not even heard of.
Right.
And I always come away with like a parcel, and I'm just really excited about it. It's just, it's so much more fun than going online, which I do as well. It's so easy. It comes the next day, but I think it's a great experience to go into these stores. So I love the Hindland Bookshop. And I remember going in there as a student at Glasgow University because it's in the West End where the university is. So it really is like student land. And I remember going in there and having a mooch and getting some things. And then last year I was back, doing my proof drop and giving them the proofs, and oh my goodness, just like a real pinch me moment, actually, like going in there rather than, obviously it was amazing going into the big chain stores as well, but to go into Hindland Bookshop and give them my books to read and just hope that they would make an order. It was wonderful. So that's my top Glasgow one. I think Edinburgh actually is, even though I don't know if I should say this because I'm such a Glasgow girl, but Edinburgh is wonderful too. But I think Edinburgh is probably better for independent bookshops. They've just got more. So one that I love is called Portobello Bookshop, which is by the sea, and it's just lovely. It's pretty big, I think, and the staff are so friendly and knowledgeable. So if anyone finds himself in Edinburgh, I definitely recommend a visit. And the other one I love in Edinburgh is quite I think it's only been open maybe a few years. It's called Rare Birds. And I love it because it's dedicated entirely to women's writing. It's the only bookshop in Scotland that's dedicated to women writers. And it's great. It's great, not just for that reason. It's lovely, and again, the staff are brilliant. And if I venture a little further away to Inverness, which is a 4-hour drive from me, Leakey's, it's called Leakey's Bookshop in Inverness, and I've only actually been once because it is a 4-hour drive away, and I've got kids and work, and how I would love to just take regular jaunts to different parts of the country and buy books, but it's not always possible. But Leakey's is lovely. It's also been in business for, I would say, about 30 years. And it's actually housed in an 18th century Gaelic church. So there's just that sense of history and tradition, which I love. And the books are piled from, like, literally from the floor right up to the rafters. So it's just wonderful when you walk in. It's just amazing to look at. And there's even a wood-burning fireplace to add to the ambience. Although the fireplace is very far away from any books, so there's no safety there. There's no safety issues there. And they do secondhand books as well as new books. I think it's actually Scotland's biggest secondhand bookshop. I think that's right. So those are my top tips. But I love, wherever I go, I love to look for secondhand shops, whether it's clothes or records or, and particularly books, and just see what I can find in there, because you just never know.
Those are wonderful recommendations. And to our audience that's tuning in from the UK, you can hop down to any of those. And of course, for our other non-US UK audience members, I feel like a vacation to Scotland is on the horizon, right? You can read Meredith alone, then you can go check out these links below, go check out these bookstores. So Claire, what you mentioned that you are working on book 2. What can you tell us about that? And I understand some writers don't want to talk about it. So, we don't want to mess with the energy of the universe, the creative muses, but
I mean, I just say, just throw all the good energy my way, because I need it at the moment. No, it's fine. It's still really early stages. We've got a first draft, so I'm currently revising the first draft. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I did read a lot of stuff about book 2 and spoke to a lot of other debut authors who were starting the book 2 process, and like the word hell was used a lot, and absolutely traumatized by this experience. So I was a little bit apprehensive, but I also did find it took me a while to get out of Meredith's world, and I felt like I was betraying her. Like I had a new protagonist, this, another woman who lives in Glasgow, and it was, I'm fine now with it, but it was strange. Because my head was still so full of Meredith and the other characters. And I think when you're doing the promo for that book as well, like I still had to think about it and talk about her. And but it's just part of the process. I mean, I do have a first draft, but I have no idea what the final draft will look like. But it's another female main character, but she's very different from Meredith. She's probably more like me in terms of her situation. She's a single mom. She's got 2 kids. She's got a toddler and a teenager, so she's kind of dealing with those different issues, and she finds out something about her past that's a real shock to her, at the same time as caring for her mother who has Alzheimer's.
Oh, wow.
So I guess she's kind of on a journey of I think it's really about identity, and there's a lot of focus on the mother-daughter relationship with different characters in the story. But I have to say, it's just amazing to have a character who isn't confined to her house, because she can go to all these places. And Yeah, so it's been quite a different experience. So some of it's set in another country, and again, it's got different timelines. This one goes back to the 70s, and then also kind of more recent. But there's quite a lot of it in the 70s in Scotland, but we're in Ireland as well for some stuff. So
exciting! We'll have to keep an eye out.
Hopefully it'll all work out.
Yeah. You know, I had Maggie O'Farrell. I interviewed for A Mighty Blaze a couple back in the fall. Yeah, she's amazing, as you know.
Amazing.
And one of the things she said is, I'm going to paraphrase her, but essentially her latest book takes place in Italy. And so she got to travel there. She was like, you should choose wisely, basically.
Yeah.
It's a great opportunity, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I did when I was trying to come up with ideas for book 2 and bouncing ideas off my agent and my publishers, and I do remember mentioning Paris at one point, and they were just like, no, I don't think that's going to work. I'm like, oh damn it! But maybe one day I'll have a book set in Paris and I can go off on a recce. And
well, as we know, your father's working on some serious fan fiction for Meredith, so you can tell him Paris.
Maybe she's in France. I don't know.
So before we sign off, I know one of the things our audience always loves to hear is, what are you reading now? Because obviously we want everyone to pick up Meredith Alone. Again, link below. But what is on your bedside table? What's a book you are enjoying or looking forward to enjoying or recently enjoyed?
Well, I have to say, first of all, that when I'm writing my own stuff, I really can't read, because the imposter syndrome is just too much to handle. You know, it's bad at the best of times, but when I'm reading a really good book and then trying to write the first draft of mine, I'm like, I can't do this. But as soon as I submitted my first draft to my editors, I could go to my very, very high to be read pile, and 2 books that I've recently read and loved. One is called Paper Cup, and it's by a Scottish writer, another Scottish writer called Karen Campbell, and she's amazing. And basically, it's about a homeless woman in Glasgow called Kelly, who finds or ends up with another woman's diamond engagement ring, and then endeavors to find this woman and give it back to her. And it's also a book with, there's darkness in that. She's a homeless woman, and there's, it tackles difficult issues, but it still manages to be just so hopeful and compassionate. And Kelly's such a memorable protagonist. I love reading books with women protagonists, and when I'm still thinking about that woman days, weeks, months after I read the book, I know that really is a book that I have to recommend. So Paper Cup by Karen Campbell, and the other one is Berlin by B. Seton. And again, it's the main character is also a woman, but she's younger. She's in her 20s. She's called Daphne, and she moves to Berlin. She's basically trying to leave demons behind, but she arrives in Berlin, and it's not long before she finds herself in some trouble. And it's dark, but it's funny and it's unpredictable. And I just love Bee's writing. And it took me back to being that age, which it doesn't feel like more than 2 minutes ago, but obviously it was a long time ago. And I think a lot of people in their 20s, we do have a kind of particular state of mind, and we're not at the stage yet where we're ready to acknowledge our own shortcomings. And I love that really as well. Like, I found it quite nostalgic on a personal level. So yeah, Berlin by B. Seton is my other top tip. So.
Wonderful. Thank you for those recommendations. We're putting the links below for people to check them out. Claire, it has been so wonderful talking with you.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been so much fun, honestly. I've been looking forward to it so much.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. I really enjoyed Meredith Alone. To our audience, please go check it out. You will get to the end of the book. You will have fall in love with Meredith. You will feel good, and then you will recommend the book to someone else. Which is the best, right? It's the best. And thank you for being with us today. To our audience, again, if you like today's show, and we certainly hope that you did, please subscribe to Amity Blaze on Facebook to get notified about all of our events. If you're not a Facebook person, we're on YouTube, we're on Twitter, and you can hop over to our website, amityblaze.com, to sign up for our newsletter. You'll get a rundown every week of all the interviews we're doing. Authors Love Bookstores will be back next week again, but we'll be at a special time, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we'll be interviewing Wendy Aarons, who is hilarious. She is a humor writer. You've seen her in The New Yorker, and you've seen her in McSweeney's, and she has a brand new book out. And we'll be talking with her in conversation with Black Pearl Books in Austin, Texas. Claire, again, thank you. Good luck with the book. I hope everyone reads it. And I will keep my eyes peeled for book number 2. I can't wait to read that as well. Good luck with that.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Be well and keep reading. We'll see you soon.